The earliest reference to Asmodeus, the demonic scourge of the Paranormal Activity franchise, is around 900 BCE in the Persian religion of Zoroastrianism. In Paranormal Activity Next of Kin, a demonology site states that Asmodeus is likely derived from Ishma Deva, the divine being of wrath. In Zoroastrianism, Ishma is an antithesis to the divine principles of their supreme god. He's a malevolent being that seeks to disrupt the cosmic order by inciting humans to commit violent acts and spreading chaos throughout the world. Ishma is just one of the many devas in the ancient Persian religion. The demonology site claims that later, the Jewish and Christian faiths built off of Ishma Deva's infamy, creating a new demon called Asmodeus, who would also be used in Islam. I should note that in our world, Asmodeus is not canonically a part of the Jewish faith, and instead exists as more of a folklore figure. This is acknowledged in the first demonology website seen in Next of Kin, which is almost entirely copy and pasted from Wikipedia. They didn't even remove the citation numbers. Demonology texts often organize their demons into classifications, and Asmodeus is classified as a prince of lust, suffering, and wrath who reigns over the 9 hells. In our world, the first known reference to Asmodeus is in the Book of Tobit, a religious text recognized by Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Christian religions. The Book of Tobit was written sometime around 200 BCE, but is set about 600 years earlier, so I'll set this timeline entry for Asmodeus around 800 BCE. The book tells the story of Tobit, a man who always insists on giving the dead a proper burial, even if doing so goes against the orders of the king. Tobit's dedication to his religious values puts him in a weird situation where a bird shits in his eye, causing him to go blind. So, Tobit is forced to send his son, Tobias, on a quest to collect some silver that he had left with a relative in another city. Tobit naming his son Tobias is the equivalent of if I named my son Zacharias. So Tobias found a guy named Azariah, and they journeyed to the city of Media, where Tobias would meet a woman named Sarah who had been engaged 7 times previously. This is what we call a red flag. Each of her fiancés was killed by the demon Asmodeus. It's determined that Tobias is the next of kin, that he must marry Sarah next. Understandably, he's a little freaked out, thinking that Asmodeus is gonna Asmodecapitate him, or something, but his guide Azariah gives him advice on driving away the demon. Tobias has to burn the heart and liver of a fish, and the smoke produced from this will send the demon away. Azariah is revealed to be the archangel Raphael, and he chains the infernal demon away in a remote location where he would remain locked up for many years. Asmodeus' next major appearance is referenced right here, the Testament of Solomon around 300 BCE. Asmodeus appears as one of the demons who is forced to help build Solomon's temple. That's referring to Solomon, the king of Israel, who is known for building that temple and authoring several religious texts. I've referenced him many times on this channel because some believe that he was also a master of magical arts with the knowledge to invoke a legion of demons. These demons are documented in a grimoire or spellbook called the Lesser Key of Solomon. That should sound familiar to anyone who watches my content. The Lesser Key of Solomon has details on Valak from the Conjuring franchise, Malthus from the Annabelle spin-offs, and King Paimon from Hereditary. But we'll get back to the Lesser Key of Solomon a little bit later in the timeline. Unfortunately, Asmodeus proved too powerful for this slavery, and when his roving eye fell on Solomon's beautiful wives, he decided enough was enough. He hurled Solomon 400 miles into the desert, then disguised himself as the king, and took over the palace as well as his wives. It's said that Asmodeus had a disdain for the act of marriage, which tracks with his brush up against Tobias in the Book of Tobit, but also may help explain some behavior later on in Paranormal Activity lore. Eventually, Solomon returned to the palace and drove the demon out. The site contains a few more examples of Asmodeus having encounters with mankind, such as the Norwegian village of Beskitter, where the demon killed their crops and livestock and turned them against each other with violence. How the villagers responded is important. They turned to a figure known as the White Witch, who managed to trap the demon inside of a chosen woman.
It is said the witch trapped the demon inside a chosen woman of God, her body a holy vessel to ensnare the powerful entity. Through her bloodline, from daughter to daughter, the demon Asmodeus be passed, lest it be unleashed upon the world.
And so, Asmodeus was confined again, trapped within a mortal body, so long as the chosen family continued to produce new generations of female offspring. However, not everyone wanted to see the evil contained. To learn how Asmodeus manipulated his way back into power in the 1930s, the meaning of the strange symbols seen throughout the Paranormal Activity franchise, and the dark truth behind Tobi's demonic grooming of young girls in the late 80s, stick around to the end of this video. This video is sponsored by Audible. Welcome to Horror History. I promised I wasn't going to buy a Ouija board. I didn't say anything about receiving one. In today's lesson, I will be covering Asmodeus from the Book of Tobit, more commonly known as Tobi, the unholy antagonist of the Paranormal Activity franchise. Actually, the idea of the demon from Paranormal Activity 1 through 6 being the same entity as Asmodeus from Next of Kin is not 100% confirmed. At first, I thought Asmodeus was a separate entity, given that they seem to have different powers and limitations. For example, it's stated multiple times that those who are haunted by the demon in the first 6 movies, which I'll refer to as the Midwives saga, cannot simply move away because the demon will stay with them. That doesn't seem to be the case for Asmodeus in Next of Kin. The haunting only happens at the farm where the demon is located. However, after doing a lot of digging, pun intended, I think there is a reason that the demon behaves differently after the Midwives saga. Plus, in Paranormal Activity 3, 4, and 6, the demon manipulates some of the young characters by referring to himself as a friend named Tobi. It's too perfect to ignore. The demon from the Book of Tobit must be using the name Tobi as a way of mocking those who bested him over 2 millennia ago. Asmodeus is the only demon mentioned in the Book of Tobit. Not to mention that Tobit's daughter-in-law, Sarah, happens to have the same name as one of the women tasked with keeping Asmodeus sealed away in the franchise. So, while I was hesitant at first, I am gonna operate under the assumption that these characters are the same, and there will be more proof as we go along. It seems to be generally accepted online too. This is more of a recent retcon though. According to the directors of Paranormal Activity 3, Tobi was originally named after someone's dog. Personally, I think the ancient demon nomenclature is a little bit scarier, so I'm glad that that backstory was introduced. But to fully understand Tobi, we've got to unpack both his followers and his foes. This one's sponsored by Audible, if you haven't figured that out. There are 2 main advantages to listening to an audiobook, like The Ghosts of Idlewood, as opposed to binging every Paranormal Activity. 1, you can be doing other stuff. I love listening while walking or while in transit. 2, Audible's got you covered with an outstanding selection of mystery, thriller, and horror. They've become the destination for fans of my channel looking for a little more audio entertainment. So many have already used my code to immerse themselves in some of the most popular suspense titles out right now, like Good Half Gone and The Coldest Case. Members also get full access to a growing selection of included audiobooks, Audible originals, and podcasts. You can download included titles all you want, and as an Audible member, you can choose 1 title a month to keep. Right now, if you use my link, you can try out Audible for free. Just visit the link in the description, audible.com/CZsWorld, or text CZsWorld to 500-500. Again, that's audible.com/CZsWorld. At some point roughly around the time of the Middle Ages, so anywhere from 500 to 1500 CE, a devil-worshipping coven known as the Midwives was formed, and sought to summon Asmodeus using spiritual symbols to open mystical doorways.
These midwives go all the way back to the Middle Ages. They were into devil worship.
Somehow, these witches had discovered Asmodeus' existence and dedicated themselves to summoning the fiendish visitant. It's possible that the Midwives' ancestors passed down the legend of Asmodeus' capture from generation to generation until they were finally able to figure out how to summon him around the time of the Middle Ages. This would make them dark counterparts to the White Witch who sealed the demon away in the first place. But another option is that they were formed as a response to the compilation of the grimoire known as the Lesser Key of Solomon. But what actually is the Lesser Key of Solomon? It's basically a series of 5 spellbooks allowing the user to summon and command spirits and demons. The first 2 books are dedicated to the latter. Ars Goetia contains the descriptions of 72 major demons, their abilities, their seals, and instructions on how to call upon them. Think of it like a Pokedex for inhuman spirits, but instead of Nidoran male, number 32 is Asmodeus. In this scripture, he's referred to as Asmodei or Asmodai due to semantic drift, and he's now upgraded to a king of hell rather than a prince. In our world, the old manuscripts of the Lesser Key of Solomon are estimated to have been created in the 16th century, which lasted from 1501 to 1600. The books are basically a compilation of ideas that are much older. Remember how I mentioned that the Midwives were formed somewhere around the time of the Middle Ages? Given that both of these dates are approximations, I'm gonna go with the headcanon that the Lesser Key of Solomon was released around 1500, and this is how the witches learned about Asmodeus and decided to form a coven to try to summon him. It's also possible that the in-universe version of Lesser Key of Solomon is this book, Malevolent Entities. And if you look at his entry in Lesser Key, it's easy to see why they wanted to do this. He's described as a powerful 3-headed being with 1 bull head, 1 human head, and 1 ram head. He has the tail of a serpent, webbed feet like a goose, and he can breathe fire. I think the version in the movie may have simplified the design from 3 heads down to 2. The fire-breathing aspect may explain why fire is one of his preferred methods of terrorizing humans. Asmodeus will give the summoner something known as the Ring of Virtues, which allows the wearer to control demons and spirits. He also teaches the arts of arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and handicrafts, and will give true and complete answers to your questions. But without a doubt, the best perk of summoning him is that he gives you invincibility. We do see this happen in Paranormal Activity, the marked ones, but it comes with the caveat that you have to stay in his good graces to continue to reap this ability. Finally, Asmodeus can help his summoner find treasure and help guard it. It's not known if the Midwives ever successfully summoned Asmodeus in the early modern period, but we do know that they would have stood in opposition to the Beiler family, the group who descended from the Norwegian villagers who wanted to keep the evil sealed away within the female constituents of the chosen bloodline. This is completely speculation, but my guess is that these two rival groups went back and forth over the years, with the Midwives setting Asmodeus free and the Beiler's chosen bloodline recapturing him. In the 1800s, the chosen bloodline and other indirect descendants moved to a farm in Buffalo, New York that would become known as the Beiler Farm.
So how long has the family been here?
200 years, I think.
Posing as Amish people, they outfitted the farm as a holding ground for the demon, its central feature being an underground cave at the bottom of a 100-foot chasm where the woman holding Asmodeus would be kept so that she could not escape if her hold on the demon started to weaken. This hole was also covered by a large podium, then enclosed and hidden away inside of a church hidden in the middle of the forest. They also discovered other methods to keep the demon at bay, such as midnight feeding rituals where they offered it meat and keeping large bags of salt on standby. When laid on the ground, a line of salt can create an uncrossable barrier for the demon. Salt is seen as a purifying agent in many cultures, and this connects to the old superstition that throwing salt over your left shoulder can protect you from bad luck, with the idea being that the devil peers over your left shoulder and this act will deter him. On the website about the historical context around Asmodeus, there are pictures that appear to depict symptoms of his escape, like Fire in the Night, dated 1885, Demon Horse, also dated 1885, and Asmodeus, The Delights of the Belly, dated 1902. These may be renderings of an actual incident where Asmodeus escaped in the late 1800s, but they could also just be an artist's interpretation of what such an event might look like. I would guess that Asmodeus did escape at least once during the family's first 130 years at the farm, because in 2021 there are paintings on the ground in the church depicting such a calamity. Asmodeus rampages as buildings burn, people and animals attack each other, and nearly the entire community is wiped out. To prevent this, the villagers sacrifice cursed two-headed animals when they're born, and a woman of the chosen bloodline must be isolated at the bottom of the chasm in order to hold the demon there underground. The whole setup is symbolic of a descent into hell. So while steps are being taken to keep the evil at bay in Buffalo, there are also efforts to bring the demon back happening in Chicago, Illinois as early as 1937. This photo shows a group of 12 witches wearing matching necklaces in the shape of a thaumaturgic triangle, which is simply a triangle placed inside of a circle, often associated with evocation rituals. Given the fact that magic does not actually exist in our world, I don't have an official source for my information on the thaumaturgic triangle, so my definition might not match yours in the same way that folktales might vary from region to region, or one family's recipe for something might be different from another's. But basically, from reading various accounts, the thaumaturgic triangle is a symbol used in demonic invocation ceremonies. The conjurer might be wearing the symbol or standing on a symbol drawn on the ground. The symbol may be a protective sigil, providing magic power for the ritual while forming a barrier that the spirits cannot cross, allowing the conjurer to communicate with the other side while reducing the likelihood of being possessed. In the case of the Paranormal Activity franchise, I think the symbol serves as a sigil for the central demon. In the Lesser Key of Solomon, each demon has a sigil that you use to contact them. For example, Asmodeus' sigil looks like this in the book, so my thought is that the movies just opted to use the simpler symbol to represent the demon. In Ars Goetia, it basically says that you must wear the sigil as a pendant, and here we see the witches wearing them as necklaces, and this symbol would come up over and over and over throughout the coven's history. So while the chosen bloodline used female offspring to hold in the demon, it seems to make sense that the midwives would use the opposite, male offspring as vessels for demonic possession.
These women, they were part of a coven. They would have these ceremonies, and they would wait till the girls were old enough to get pregnant, and then they would take their sons, and then they would brainwash them, and they didn't remember a thing.
It seems that girls could be possessed, but that wasn't Asmodeus' main goal. He wanted to build an army of firstborn boys. In my Hereditary video, I talked about how Paimon only wanted to move into a male body because he didn't mesh well with a female. So perhaps there's a similar thing going on here. As a demon, Asmodeus wants to trick humans into making a bargain with him so that he can eventually possess the firstborn male in his victim's family.
It has been said that if a human makes a bargain with a demon for wealth, power, or any other benefit, they must forfeit their firstborn male. If the debt is not honored, the demon will follow the defaulter and his or her brood until its soul of an infant is collected.
And that's exactly what would happen in the 1950s to the family of a girl named Diane Mercer. Diane Mercer was about 8 years old when she began being haunted by Tobi in the mid-1950s. We don't know how she became associated with the demon, but based on other cases, we can assume that the midwives targeted her mom as a potential surrogate mother, someone who would give birth to the vessel that Asmodeus would move into. This is why the coven call themselves the Midwives. While a midwife today is a married woman who ranks as a 5 or 6 on the classic 1 through 10 hotness scale, the word originally referred to a woman trained to assist during the childbirth process. Asmodeus didn't just want to take over any existing male body. His preference was to have a newborn that could be his from wire to wire, and he was willing to wait in order to get one. When Diane was born and it was a girl, he just decided he'd wait for the parents to have a boy. And if that didn't happen, he'd just have to wait for Diane to grow up and hopefully have a boy. Now, I can only speculate on his true motivations, but his hauntings seemed to come in waves. As I mentioned, it started when Diane was 8 years old and culminated with her childhood home burning down. Tobi didn't surface in her life again until her adulthood in June 1966 when she got roommates, and these roommates witnessed some of the paranormal activity, such as dark shadows moving around the apartment and lights turning on even when unplugged. This would establish a pattern that would repeat in future victims: an initial haunting around the age of 8, an unexplainable house fire, and a return to prominence in adulthood. I think the reason for this cycle is the demon's ability to feed on fear, something that is mentioned several times throughout the Paranormal Activity chronicles.
Whatever it was, it thrived on fear.
Well, the book says it feeds off of your fear.
Demons feed on fear.
It's also stated that children are the most susceptible to spiritual contact. I would guess Tobi will approach a child from 5 to 8 years old and haunt the family as much as possible, but always stop when the family starts to get desensitized to the fear. It's like when you take a break from watching your favorite horror movie because you no longer find it scary after the 4th viewing. When Tobi re-emerges in adulthood, it's usually triggered by a change in the person's life. In Diane Mercer's case, that was getting roommates, people who had never experienced paranormal activity and would be afraid of it, allowing Tobi to feast on their fear and regain power. Another possibility is that Tobi wanted to kill the family members of his targets so that the midwives could adopt the orphan children and have more control over them. After her roommates jumped ship, Diane seemingly became oppressed by the demon. She stopped socializing and began skipping classes, even replying in plural when asked about her behavior by saying things like "we're okay" and "stop bothering us." Eventually, she turned violent and would lash out at friends and family. She began having what appeared to be self-sustained cuts on her arms and legs, but other injuries were not so easy to explain. A website about her story can be seen in Paranormal Activity if you pause at just the right moment, and it documents what happened to her. Bite marks on her neck and back and strange burns and welts on her face. Her parents arranged for a local priest to pay a visit and provide guidance. The priest immediately raised the possibility of demonic possession and suggested that they contact an exorcist sanctioned by the Catholic Church. After the exorcist arrived, Diane's condition quickly deteriorated. Diane has completely withdrawn into herself and was not communicating with anyone. She exhibited all the classic symptoms of demonic possession. She refused to leave her bed for days and seemed to be sensitive to light, always preferring the darkness. Her only mode of communication was spewing obscenities at anyone that would speak to her. Her parents noticed that she is scratching herself and attempting to poke her eyes. They tried to keep her restrained. That only worked for a short time. Her condition kept getting worse and she started gnawing on her arm in an attempt to free herself of the restraints. By the time it was noticed, much of the flesh on her upper arm was gone. Despite the extraordinary amount of pain she must have experienced, she never indicated that she was feeling any discomfort as she almost completely amputated her arm. She never seemed to respond to the exorcism attempts, and on February 16, 1967, when she was left unattended for a short while, she completely severed her arm with her teeth. She bled to death before she could receive proper medical treatment, and was smiling victoriously, as if the demon that was possessing her was showing to the world that it won the battle. Diane serves as a warning about what happens when you try to fight the demon, or what happens when it becomes clear that Tobi isn't going to get what he wants. He would rather kill off his host than risk being exorcised from her body. With Diane's death, Tobi would have needed to attach himself to a new family, and he wouldn't have to wait long, because one of the midwives, a witch named Lois, lusted for wealth and power, and made a deal with the devilish entity to forfeit the firstborn male in her family. I don't think we know exactly how old Lois is, but if we go by the age of the actress, Haley Foote, she would have been 40 years old at the time that Diane Mercer passed away in 1967, and had likely already given birth to her daughter Julie, who would have been about 10 years old at this time. They're both part of a long streak in the family, where only girls are born for over 70 years.
I went through the entire family line, and Hunter is the first male to be born on Kristi's side since at least the 1930s.
Julie always claimed that she wanted a son, but she never got one. At some point, the Midwives started kidnapping young boys all over the world as Asmodeus continued building his army. The first confirmed abductee is Christopher Landon, a boy taken from Petaluma, California on July 1st, 1980. By the way, this is a reference to Christopher Landon, a writer on every English Paranormal Activity movie to date besides the original and The Ghost Dimension. On September 3rd, 1980, Lois's first granddaughter, Katie Featherston, would have been born. Around 1983, Julie would give birth to a second daughter, Kristi. Because both of them were female, Tobi was less interested in fully possessing them. So when Kristi was old enough to process the fear, the demon came forward to her, introducing himself as Tobi. At some point between 1983 and 1988, Katie and Kristi's biological father died. We don't know if Asmodeus had anything to do with this, but we do know that he has a history of killing engaged couples. Julie begins dating a new guy named Dennis, who eventually moves into their Santa Rosa, California home, but they do not get engaged. During Katie's 8th birthday on September 3rd, 1988, Kristi can be seen alone under the trampoline talking to someone, and the family assumed that Tobi was just an imaginary friend, but Kristi continued to insist that he was real. Nobody notices or pays much attention to the ancient occult text printed around the rim of Kristi's paintings, but I'll revisit that in a little bit when we get a better look at it. That week, Tobi witnesses Katie's mom take the infamous picture of her before school, and this would come back much later. Dennis is the first to notice the paranormal activity. He hears noises around the house, a Teddy Ruxpin doll activates on its own, doors open on their own, and debris from an earthquake briefly reveals the shape of a figure that had been standing by Julie and Dennis's bed.
There's something there. There was something there.
See? You see? Well, you don't see it?
This is one trait of Asmodeus that could be considered a weakness. He's usually invisible to anyone over the age of 5, except when interacting with powders. I say that it could be considered a weakness because it also seems to be a strength, in that it helps drum up more fear, which, as we know, gives him more power. And that's just what happens here. Dennis would set up cameras all around the house, hoping to capture whatever it is he saw on tape again. On September 10th, 1988, Kristi gets out of bed in the middle of the night to speak to Tobi. She would later claim she can't tell about what they talked about or she'll be in big trouble. She just warns Dennis not to call him fat. The rest of that week is marred with experiences of weird noises and lights, a swinging lamp, and window shutters that slam shut on their own. During the night, on Saturday, September 17th, Kristi runs all around the house doing weird stuff, clearly interacting with Tobi. And during the day, her mom finds her painting in her room, but doesn't notice her easel outlined with strange foreign markings. There are a number of occult and magical alphabets to try to translate from. The characters on the left most closely resemble the Theban alphabet, a 1500s witch writing system commonly associated with the Wicca movement. Across the top, I wasn't able to identify most of the characters, but they look like a mix of different characters found in alphabets that are associated with magic and mysticism, several of which have stylistic similarities to the design of the sigils found in the Lesser Key of Solomon. Feel free to comment if I'm wrong, but I don't think the characters on the easel were meant to be translated, but rather just meant to tell us that the 5-year-old Kristi has been indoctrinated with witch vernacular by the demon that she's been communicating with. Hauntingly, when her mom comes to check on her, she claims Tobi is there in the room with them.
Are you just asking yourself, standing right next to you?
Later that day, Katie and Kristi play Bloody Mary and a door slams shut after they leave the room. Things intensify the next day when a fuse blows and the swinging lamp from earlier crashes to the ground. Katie is locked in the closet for mocking her sister's imaginary friend, and the babysitter is nearly scared to death by Tobi's activity, including a chilling blast of air that hits her from the corner of the girl's room.
She got blown in the face.
The 21st sees Kristi doing even more weird stuff. At one point, jumping over the ledge after Tobi promises her that she'll be okay. She is okay in the end, and this is the first example we see of Tobi granting a human with invincibility. In doing so, he's also building up trust with her, an important first step to control her later on. But he also shows his ability to remove her invincibility a night later after she talks back to him. She would be hospitalized with a high fever that day. Also that day, Dennis finds a thaumaturgic triangle drawn in the closet, this time with the letters MCL drawn in the corners. This is a specific variant of the thaumaturgic triangle called Solomon's Triangle. The MCL is an abbreviated version of Micah, a reference to the biblical archangel Michael, who is often said to protect against demons. I doubt either of the little girls would know about this though, so it could be seen as a challenge by Asmodeus, essentially flaunting that the supposedly powerful angel cannot do anything to stop him now. And he seems to be correct in this assumption. Nobody can stand in his way as he cuts a babysitter, throws furniture all around the room, and yanks Katie by the hair. The 1988 haunting would reach its climax on September 23rd. A phantom wind awakens the Featherston girls, and the thaumaturgic triangle appears on a light bright near Kristi's bed before she proclaims the demon's arrival. The malevolent apostate unleashes hell on the family, prompting them to flee to the grandmother Lois's house in Moore Park, unaware that she is the cause for their 14 nights of horror. When the women of the family play dress up and garb Kristi as a bride, only Lois understands the symbolic meaning behind it.
So who's the lucky guy?
Tobi.
This is another reason I came to like the idea of Asmodeus and Tobi being one and the same. Asmodeus was the destroyer of marriage and engagement in the Book of Tobit, and now he's ensuring Kristi's marital loyalty remains with him. That night, Lois calls upon the other midwives to arrive at her house to perform the ritual, and Katie and Kristi go missing from their rooms. A painting that Kristi had been drawn to on their arrival has been removed to reveal the full, unabbreviated Solomon's Triangle, and another reveals the sigil of Baphomet, a crest sometimes used as a symbol for Satanism, but also just used as a representation of the occult in general. This instance of the symbol basically just implies that the demon's actions are part of a larger, mysterious plan, as Dennis would find out shortly after. He stumbles into the garage, which is filled with old witches, just standing in the dark. It's already too late. The events to kill Julie and Dennis so that the coven can take in Katie and Kristi have already been set into motion. We do see a quick glimpse of their summoning ritual in the backyard. 3 people standing in a triangle around a massive fire. Julie is levitated by the demon at the top of the stairs and tossed down to become a broken pile of bones at the bottom, and Dennis is aerated across the room, our first ever POV aerate, in fact, and his back is brutally broken by Tobi. The last thing we see from Dennis's camera is Lois telling the girls to come along and get ready, and Kristi inviting Tobi to join them. There are still recordings of them after this though. I'm not sure who's recording them and for what purpose. I don't know why the coven would want evidence of what they're doing to be out there. I guess this is just what happens when movie producers make a found footage franchise and slowly come to regret the choice to make it found footage. But also don't want to ditch the format because Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2 was real bad. I mean, forget I said that. It's all real. All of this actually happened. Anyway, they're taken to a man who is introduced as their teacher, who says he's been friends with Tobi for a long time and has known him by other names. This is another potential piece of evidence that Tobi is merely being used as a child-friendly nickname for the demon Asmodeus. This ponytail guy is known as Kent in the credits, and seems to be sort of an authority figure to the coven whose familiarity with Tobi predates even Lois.
I had to learn too. It was hard at first, but it was worth it.
Not much is known about Kent. He could be some kind of high priest or liaison between the midwives and Asmodeus, but his abilities as a seer are legitimate. He predicts Kristi will grow up to have a son who is one of the demon's chosen targets, or as they would later become known, the Marked Ones. I find it interesting that both the demon-worshipping midwives and the demon-loathing Beiler family subscribe to this idea of a chosen one to hold the evil at bay and the other to provide it with a living vessel. The two groups have opposite goals but approach them in a similar manner. From this point on, Kent and the coven seem to be taking care of the girls, apparently bathing their feet in milk and brainwashing them to see Lois as their new mother. The dairy footbaths may be another mockery of religious tradition, where the washing of feet symbolizes purification, humility, and servitude. It wouldn't be that different from Asmodeus taking on the name of a biblical character, Tobit, as a sign of disrespect, or the use of the name Michael, the archangel, as part of the thaumaturgic triangle used for demonic invocation. Whatever the coven was trying to do to these girls, it was weird, but they did manage to grow up and turn out to be somewhat normal. But before we can get there are a couple of hidden secrets to address. In the aftermath of Katie and Kristi's adoption by their grandmother, their prior life was slowly erased. Katie was old enough to remember the horror into adulthood, and the presence would continue to bother her even as her sister slept through it.
I would feel the breathing would wake me up, and I would wake her up, and I would see the, I guess you'd call it like
the boobs?
Like just a mass, like the shadowy just figure that would be at the foot of my bed.
Kristi didn't really remember it, but she did remember the fear she felt. Kent seems to be teaching Kristi the art of seeing the future by channeling her vision through Tobi, and the sisters are put through a number of cult rituals which they're told will help them find other special people. And we see this when Kristi's son, Hunter, appears on a tape with them in 1992, a full 13 years before he would even be born. The lesser key entry for Asmodee makes no mention of time travel, but it does mention his mastery of astronomy. With planetary alignment and wormholes being so closely associated with ripples in time, maybe that's why the Coven is able to access characters throughout the timeline through Tobi. I'm not going to dwell too much on the time travel stuff because most of it ends up being pretty inconsequential with one exception. Long story short, Kristi is able to see some people who are watching the tapes of her 21 years in the future, and they get kind of spooked. Now, before we move on from the Paranormal Activity 3 section of the timeline, there are two hidden frames nested in that movie. One is hidden in the static at the beginning, and one is hidden in the static at the end. The one at the beginning shows the kitchen of Julie's house in Santa Rosa, and the girls are wearing chef's hats as they bake something, presumably the cake for Katie's birthday. The one at the end shows the parents' bedroom, and the bed is on fire, an image that is later explained in Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension.
Whole place burned down in '92. No bodies were recovered. It says the whole family just disappeared, including their daughters, Katie and Kristi.
The next decade was pretty sparse in terms of Paranormal Activity. Katie would turn 13 in 1993 and claimed that weird things would happen periodically throughout her teenage years. My original assumption was that the haunting stopped after this because Katie moved out and got away from Kristi, who the demon was attached to. However, it's also possible that at some point in the mid-90s, Asmodeus was recaptured by the Beiler family. Speaking of whom, over in Buffalo, on October 10th, 1997, a woman named Sarah, who was next in line to house the demon, ran away from the farm and abandoned her baby at a hospital where the Beilers would be unable to find her. Finally, at some point between 1994 and 2005, Grandma Lois supposedly passed away.
Somehow I ended up with it after Grandma Lois died. I haven't even gone through it.
Maybe the invincibility granted to her by Asmodeus was stripped when the Beiler family temporarily recaptured the demon. You know, sometimes I'm making these videos and I actually get kind of exhausted while trying to make up excuses to cover up all the plot holes. Like, my creativity is really being stretched. Anyway, after almost a century without a male being born in the family, almost like a tribe of Garuda warriors, Kent's prediction comes true, and Kristi finds herself pregnant with a baby boy. The baby, Hunter Rey, was born on June 6th, 2005. The 6th day of the 6th month of the 6th year of the millennium. Perhaps the first example of paranormal activity in the Rey household is the front door being reopened on its own after the family comes inside. And speaking of the family, it consists of Kristi, her husband Daniel Rey, Daniel's daughter from another marriage, Allison Rey, and the dog Abby. If there was any activity during Hunter's first year, it wasn't prevalent enough to be documented on video. But in the summer of 2006, Tobi's wrath comes out all at once, trashing nearly the entire house, but only taking two items: a necklace that Kristi had received from Katie, and the box of VHS tapes from the basement, containing all the evidence of Katie and Kristi being haunted by the demon in 1988 and 1992. The one room that goes undisturbed is Hunter's nursery. I guess it makes sense that Tobi didn't want to trash what would eventually be his room. Assuming that they had just been hit by a vandal, the Rey family has a video security system installed on August 7th, 2006. At least I think it's August 7th, 2006, because Paranormal Activity 2 does this really dumb thing with the way that the dates are labeled. If you don't care about the details surrounding the chronological continuity of dates, which honestly you shouldn't care, then feel free to skip this chapter. In the PA franchise, each night of the haunting is labeled with the title card that shows the date and how many nights the paranormal activity has been occurring. But the second movie appears to have constant errors every couple days. After almost a full day of agonizing over what appeared to be chronological errors, I think I've come to realize why. The dates that we are shown each night are not necessarily the current dates, but rather the dates that the sun went down to begin that night. So for example, we start with night 1. The title card says August 7th, 2006, and the time is 1:36 a.m. So because it's past midnight, we have now rolled over to August 8th, 2006. But the title card still says August 7th because that's the date that the sun went down, even though we never see that happen. The original film does this as well, and it's one of the stupidest systems that they could have possibly come up with because more often than not, the paranormal activity doesn't begin until after midnight. So the majority of the time, the dates shown in the title cards are fucking wrong. The later movies avoid this issue entirely by never showing the title card before midnight. Because of this, I'll try to avoid relying on specific dates too much, which should be easy because most of the runtime is just nothing happening. For example, during the second week of August, a pool light goes out, the pool vacuum finds its way out of the pool, Hunter's high chair topples over on its own, a mirror flexes, and Hunter's mobile moves on its own. Hunter appears to see Tobi at night, which is to be expected, but it seems that the dog, Abby, can also see the dark spirits. In addition to all of that, Katie's childhood photo that I said would come back later does indeed come back later.
I thought we lost all our pictures in the fire.
The following week saw an increase in activity, like demonic voices coming through on the baby monitor, a pan falling off the rack in the kitchen, twice, and the stove heating up on its own and starting a fire. It's unlikely that this is how Asmodeus started the Mercer and Featherston fires because each of those were investigated and no clear source of the blaze was found. That isn't the only source of heat though. Daniel is nearly scorched alive in the hot tub. At some point during the week, Katie pays her little sister a visit and encourages her not to overreact, which proves to be easier said than done for the teenage stepdaughter, Allie. After falling asleep on the couch while babysitting Hunter, she hears a phantom voice calling out to her in the street and finds herself locked out of the house when Tobi slams the door shut on her. She would later go on to explain.
I took a nap and I heard somebody calling my name. What? I felt something, like somebody was calling my name, and I felt somebody there.
With the only caretaker stuck outside the house, nothing could get between Asmodeus and his target, Hunter. Footsteps can be heard marching up the stairs towards the baby's nursery, and an unseen force drags and lifts Hunter out of his crib. Somehow, he safely makes it down the stairs, but then he tries to get into the basement, a location that the dog had been disturbed by a week prior. Somehow, the 1-year-old ends up back in his crib safely, likely protected by the guardianship of Asmodeus. It's not known what happened in the basement, and it's difficult to tell if Hunter was successfully possessed, but from this point forward, the following scratches can be seen on the inside of the basement door. It appears to say Melk, or possibly Mayos. I do think it's supposed to say Mayos because the word would appear again more legibly in 2012. Mayos is a Latin word meaning mine, the demon laying his claim over the body of the Rey family's youngest child. At the bottom of this door, you'll also see the letters AF. This is because Tobi goes hard AF. The week of August 21st contains disturbing sounds in the night, autonomous baby toys, cabinets flying open, and an attack against Abby after she sees something troubling in the basement. She's found passed out behind the couch and has to be rushed to an animal hospital, leaving Kristi home alone to watch over the sleeping baby. Her strategy is to ignore the paranormal happenings on the advice of her sister, but that doesn't seem to stop the demon from getting more aggressive than ever. She's air-yeeted multiple times out of Hunter's room and down the stairs, eventually being locked in the basement at 1:49 a.m. It isn't until 2:58 a.m. that the basement door opens and Kristi comes out in a seemingly possessed state, sporting a bite mark on her leg and staying in Hunter's room all the next day. Allie tries to pick up the baby when Kristi leaves the room, and we don't see what happens after that, but it leaves Allie in tears. When her dad gets home, they look over the tape of Kristi getting possessed and decide to call their old babysitter Martine, who helps them prepare a crucifix and tells them that they can transfer the curse onto a blood relative. And seeing as how Kristi was removed from any family connections by the Midwives when she was 5 years old, there's only one blood relative that they know, her older sister, Katie. So, with no other option to protect his family, Dan goes to perform the transfer ritual, and that's when his seemingly catatonic wife jumps to life. And this surge of power causes the whole house to go dark, and just for a split second, the baby appears to be crawling out on the streets, which is just one example of the chaos Asmodeus causes to try to prevent his demonic infestation from being transferred to yet another woman with no male offspring. His other methods include throwing furniture, luring Dan into the basement with the sound of Hunter's voice, and wild animals causing panic. He does eventually find Hunter after tripping over a box, but when he goes to retrieve the camera, a black-eyed, razor-fanged Kristi attacks. Prepared with the crucifix, he's able to press it up against her, despite the entire place shaking uncontrollably. And this is apparently the final step in completing the transfer ritual. We don't see the demon leaving her body, but we do hear unholy cries as the corruptive spirit is ripped away from the body of his target. At 12:07 a.m. on August 27, 2006, the power comes back on, and the Rey family, along with their baby, Hunter, are safe. For now. Tobi would immediately begin torturing Katie again at her San Diego home. She and her boyfriend, Micah Sloat, experience paranormal activity, including flickering lights, faucets turning on and off, banging sounds, scratching sounds, and phantom whispers, some of which are calling out Katie's name. On September 18th, Micah gets a camera, planning to film their lives so that when the paranormal activity occurs, they'll have it captured. But it's clear that he has no idea what he's up against.
Well, hopefully once we get on camera, we can figure out what's going on.
Okay.
Once we know what's going on, we can react appropriately and
go from there.
It's possible that the real motivation for getting the camera might be to coerce Katie into stripping in front of it, because he keeps trying to make that happen. And not just him, it seems like every Paranormal Activity movie has a character interested in documenting his private life. Anyway, that's just a weird thing that I noticed. Katie speaks to a psychic to report that things have started happening again over the last few weeks. She's kind of going against her own advice here by talking about the supernatural phenomenon instead of ignoring it. But maybe she figured that talking to a psychic would give her a better understanding of what was happening. During the week of September 18th, they hear footsteps in the night, keys move on their own, as does their bedroom door, which Micah tries asking the demon about against the advice of the psychic and against the wishes of his girlfriend. Since the demon feeds on negative energy and Micah's prodding into the paranormal stresses Katie out, Tobi continues to gain more and more power. Or at least that's my interpretation. I think it's also a fair conclusion to say that Micah's just kind of a douchebag and Tobi doesn't really like it. Micah picks up a book, Devils, Demons, and Witchcraft. He's clearly just excited about the prospect of catching something on camera, but he may have also triggered even more of the demon's wrath by flipping right past the page on Asmodeus. This is a real book, and using it, we can get a better look at the text. Asmodeus, the biblical demon of anger and lust, from Tobit chapter 3, verse 8. There probably wasn't much thought put into this at the time, but it is interesting that the Book of Tobit appears canonically as early as the first Paranormal Activity. On September 23rd, Katie awakes with a gasp at 2:55 a.m., claiming that it was just a nightmare. However, I would guess that the ability to infiltrate nightmares is also something that the demon possesses, because a month earlier, Allie Ray had a similar experience.
And there's one in particular where this guy is standing at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep about like a foot back from the bed there.
I'm not suggesting that Asmodeus's powers go as far as the dream demon himself, Freddy Krueger, and I'm not suggesting that they should. He's already got enough going on with invincibility and time travel stuff. I'm guessing this is more of a case of a target being able to sense his presence even while asleep, and that's about it. Nothing would happen again for over a week, but on September 31st, the couple is subjected to a week's worth of terror. On October 3rd, Katie jolts awake at 1:36 a.m. and stands next to the bed for nearly an hour before going downstairs and sitting on a swing in the backyard, refusing to come back in even though it's freezing outside. It's clear that the same form of possession that afflicted her sister 5 weeks prior has now taken over her. She shares the same unsharp stare, lack of motivation to get up, and dearth of presence in her current environment. But as quickly as she was put into this state, she snaps out of it, unable to remember why she was out of bed, only the nightmares that haunted her throughout the night. That's when Micah gets the Ouija board, going against the advice of Katie, the psychic, and Ronnie Radke all in one fell swoop.
No. I promised you I wasn't gonna buy a Ouija board. I didn't buy a Ouija board.
You mean exactly what I meant.
I borrowed a Ouija board.
Katie's fury helps feed the demon with more negative energy, and the ensuing argument continues outside the house. But while they're gone, a phantom wind blows through the home, and the Ouija planchard moves around on its own. Then, the surface of the board catches fire, bringing reminders of the mysterious flame that started on Julie's bed in 1988 and the kitchen fire seen at Kristi's just that summer. Or even the unexplained fire that turned Diane Mercer's childhood home into ash. Which could be relevant, because Micah would later analyze the movements of the planchard, deducing that the demon spelled out "Goodbye Dina, Nadine," or notably, Diane. Micah's next move is to cover the floor outside of their room with baby powder, hoping to turn up footprints. As you'll recall, one of the only substances that reacts to Asmodeus in the real world is powder, so this actually works just as Micah had hoped. Katie's theory is that it left the footprints on purpose to scare them, which is possible, but I don't believe that to be the case, because later instances of the demon do kind of confirm that it is a physical creature that takes up space on another plane of existence. That night, they also find a displaced tile in the closet, leading them to find the burnt childhood photo of Katie that should have been destroyed twice now. Once in the fire at the Santa Rosa house, and once by Daniel Rey after ridding the curse from his family. After this, Tobi continues to slowly drive them insane. It's early in the morning on October 8th when the air yeeting commences. A dark shadow moves into the room and Katie is dragged out of bed into the hall. She ends up with a nasty bite mark matching the one previously seen on Kristi, and once again, the symptoms mirror hers as well as what we know about Diane Mercer. She refuses to get out of bed, and just as Diane was seen smiling victoriously in her final moments, Katie looks content with the situation and shuts her eyes.
I think we'll be okay now.
Katie and Micah's last documented night together would be the nights of October 8th and October 9th. She sits straight up at 1:27 a.m., her feet bent in unnaturally. Nearly 2 hours are spent watching Micah from beside the bed, but at 3:14, she screams out for him from downstairs. Suddenly, the air goes silent, and Micah is air-yeeted into the room before Katie, now covered in dark spatter, crawls up and attacks the camera. Now, with full control over the older Featherston sister, Tobi uses her to get back to the Rey household, where she breaks Dan's neck and tosses Kristi and Hunter into the security camera. Kristi seems to be killed instantly, but Katie picks up Hunter and disappears. Allie Rey, who is not related by blood to Hunter, becomes the only one left in the household. Just like Katie and Kristi had disappeared after their childhood incident with Asmodeus, Hunter becomes a missing person, with Katie remaining at large, as confirmed by this newspaper article later seen in the marked ones. A local couple was found dead in their home over the weekend, the victims of an apparent homicide. The couple's young son has been confirmed missing. According to a source, police are asking for any information regarding the whereabouts of Katie Featherston, Mrs. Rey's sister, who is their prime suspect. And things would stay that way for the next 5 years. This is kind of a mystery period in the history of Asmodeus, but also for the Paranormal Activity series as a whole. At the end of 2006, it seems that Tobi has won, with Katie possessed and baby Hunter in tow. But, for whatever reason, Hunter never gets possessed, and the two are separated, with Katie losing track of his whereabouts. It's possible that he wasn't possessed because Asmodeus is waiting until he is fully mature. At least that's the theory posed later on by Allie.
Which is that mark right there. The midwives will mark an unborn male in utero, and then they wait for the baby to mature until he's ready to be possessed.
Her idea is that 6 + 6 + 6 = 18. So although the target is selected from birth, the possession doesn't actually happen until age 18. Which is pretty stupid, but it does look like Allie has done her research on the midwives. But the question of how Hunter and Katie got separated remains unanswered for the minority of people who still cared about the franchise at this point. Sorry, I meant to say something else. I meant to say it's a huge unanswered question for the Carlsbad and San Diego police departments who have video of Katie committing the crimes before she seemingly vanishes from the face of the earth. Hunter somehow ended up in an adoption facility, but he was never identified. His name was changed to Wyatt, and he was eventually taken in by the Nelson family, consisting of parents Doug and Holly and their daughter, Alex. In an interview with MTV, Paranormal Activity 4 co-director Henry Joost weighed in on the subject. The interviewer asks, how did Wyatt end up with Alex's family? Since Paranormal Activity 2 ends with Katie abducting Hunter, it doesn't necessarily make sense for him to be with another family at the start of Paranormal 4. That, I think, would have to be the subject of another movie, Joost said. It wasn't the subject of another movie, so surprisingly, at the peak of the interdimensional excitement, there's a 5-year gap. A gap without any paranormal activity at all. But that doesn't mean that the midwives sat still on the sidelines. Kent, the guy who theorizes the male high priest of the coven, makes moves to have a new family become the main target of Asmodeus. I'm guessing when Hunter and Katie were separated, he assumed Hunter was a lost cause and picked the Fleege family to take their place. On May 8th, 2010, he can be seen scouting a house in Santa Rosa, California that the Fleeges would soon move into, as if it were built just for Tobi.
Very happy with this house. It's a good house for him. This is a good space. Done a wonderful job.
See, right?
Very good entry point in here.
Sure enough, the Fleege family moves into this new house 3 days later, not realizing that it's on the same plot of land where the Featherstons' childhood home was burned down. The seller was someone named Katie Hubbard. I'm guessing that's a pseudonym for Katie Featherston. Subscribe for more mind-blowing facts that no one ever could have figured out on their own. All the while, kids continue to go missing around the world as Tobi continues to build up his army. That brings us to Paranormal Activity 4. You guys are lucky they didn't call it Paraformal Activity or something, because you know I would have just pronounced it like that every single time. Katie/Tobi finally resurfaces on November 2nd when a new family moves in across the street from the Nelsons in Henderson, Nevada. Something happens to the mom and she's hospitalized, so the Nelsons offer to look after her son, Robbie. Not long after, more paranormal activity would commence. Robbie, the creepy kid from across the street, seems to trigger the otherworldly occurrences in the Nelson household. But his true role in all of this is kind of a mystery. It initially appears that Robbie is Hunter, but that ends up not being the case. So let's turn once more to that director's interview with MTV. I think if you watch the film again, what Robbie's doing will become a little clearer, Joost said. We have a very specific idea of what he is and how he fits into the larger picture, but we really felt like in paranormal tradition, it's better to just give the tiniest amount of information at a time and leave Robbie this mysterious character. I can personally attest that I have seen the film more than once and it did not become clear. I even have a friend who watched it 40 times and it still did not become clear.
I'm watching Paranormal Activity 4 every week for 100 weeks. Yeah, if you survive. If I survive. If I continue to do this, which I will.
He didn't, but luckily, co-director Ariel Schulman offered up a more complete answer. Robbie is a messenger, Schulman said. He's sort of a messenger for the coven, and he has a relationship with Tobi where if it's time for Tobi to meet a new child, Robbie can service that arrangement as the introduction. Sure, we'll go with that, because I really want to make it through this video without quitting like Levin did. Anyway, Robbie has an invisible friend named Tobi, and the thaumaturgic triangle makes its return in a sandbox. The characters play Connect Sports with Tobi, and he has this creepy blank avatar. I only bring this up as a point of relevance because we never see the form factor that Tobi presents to the kids, so this is one of our only points of reference as to how they actually see him. We can only piece together certain aspects of his appearance using the falling dust in 1988, the footprints in 2006, the bite marks, and now the tracking dots on the Xbox Kinect, which accidentally capture the outline of an invisible figure sitting next to Robbie on the couch.
Can we please put this on YouTube?
No.
I'm telling you, he'd be like famous.
Yes, please let this get views. This video took forever to make. Alex's boyfriend rigs all of the computers in the house to record, so throughout the month, we see more familiar phenomena. Crashing light fixtures, moving furniture, 2 a.m. witch meetings, and occult symbols. Strangely, when Alex looks up the circle within a triangle symbol, instead of turning up results about Solomon's triangle or the thaumaturgic triangle, this site describes the Hattusak symbol of fertility, which was often present in sacred rituals whereupon a demon would take possession of a male child. The Hattusak symbol of fertility is not a real-life concept, and the image is just an image of Solomon's triangle. I'm not sure if this is a mistake of some kind by whoever created this website, but the story of wishing fertility upon the woman who would deliver a male child for the purposes of being possessed by the demon does mesh well with Asmodeus' intentions.
In order for the demon to enter the host, the Hittites believed 3 stages had to be completed.
These steps are less like the 3 stages of demonic possession from The Conjuring and more like a to-do list for someone who wants to summon the demon. The 3 steps include spilling the blood of a virgin, which could theoretically have something to do with why Hunter was never possessed in 2006. Though it really shouldn't be that hard to find a virgin. Not like they didn't have Smash Bros in 2006. Later that day, Katie shows up, claiming to be Robbie's mom. She doesn't have the emotionless, methodical behavior that we saw when she was first possessed by Tobi, so is she still possessed? I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that she isn't currently possessed, but after being possessed the first time, she essentially joined the coven and is working for them now, with their goal being to get back Hunter. This could also explain why she was posing as a realtor to sell the house on her old property. Katie plants the seed in Wyatt's head that he's adopted, and his real name is Hunter. Interestingly, in Wyatt's room, from the get-go, you can see these kind of dinosaur footprints decorating the wall, which are very similar to the footprints that Tobi left in Micah's baby powder trap. Almost as if some subconscious part of him was always connected to the demon after being kidnapped in 2006. On November 16th, 2011, Wyatt is lured out of bed by another ghostly figure. As he heads downstairs, the Connect tracking dots show him being followed by a figure the size of a little boy. This childish specter reappears behind Wyatt as he speaks to Tobi in front of the TV. This was initially another point of confusion for me because it seems to suggest that there's another entity in addition to Tobi, which hasn't been alluded to at all up to this point. But I think we should just take that one MTV interview as gospel and assume that this is just another messenger created by Tobi. If Tobi can create a messenger in human form, I don't see any reason he can't create proxies in the spirit world. Am I just going with this explanation because I want to get through this portion of the video? Is this my blown call in the bottom of the 19th because I want to go home? I'm not legally obligated to answer that. The dad comes downstairs after hearing Wyatt loudly objecting to his real name being Hunter, and the ghost child disappears, never to be seen again. During bath time that day, Wyatt is punished for his disobedience. Whoa, I guess I spoke too soon when I said that Tobi is not quite Freddy Krueger. Wyatt, or should I say Hunter, is shell-shocked upon coming back up, and his adoptive sister would find the word Hunter scribbled on his closet door the next morning. Less than 24 hours later, Hunter would disappear for the final time. Tobi and Katie's next attempt to recover their prospective spirit vessel comes on night 12, which spans November 17th to November 18th, 2011. Alex is tasked with babysitting Wyatt, and in a situation familiar to what happened to Allie Ray in 2006, she finds herself trapped in the garage with a running car. Remember how I said the possession ritual supposedly required the blood of a virgin, according to that one sketchy website? Well, if Tobi killed Alex via carbon monoxide poisoning, wouldn't that kind of not fulfill the requirement? It specifically says sacrifice. The host will be compelled to spill the blood of an inviolate. This is our first clue that Alex wasn't actually meant to be the sacrifice overall, which we would find out later. It's honestly very confusing. Paranormal Activity 4 is very good at raising questions and not answering them. Alex does manage to escape by driving through the garage door, but while all this is going on, Katie goes upstairs and attempts to abduct Hunter. I guess she's not successful that day, so she comes back the next day and looks for Hunter/Wyatt while Tobi deals with Holly downstairs. Speaking of the downstairs, their living room layout makes no sense. They have two couches and neither of them face the TV. In order to watch TV from one of these couches, you would have to turn your head 90 degrees to the left or right. There is no way that would be comfortable. Anyway, when Holly goes to pick up a book that had fallen, she feels Tobi breathing down her neck. Then she's aerated to the ceiling and falls and dies Gibby style. Alex's boyfriend comes over, but he dies, and strangely, as Katie cleans up both of the messes, she's now acting methodical and void of emotion, as if she's been possessed again. Maybe Tobi still has possession of her, but he can switch back and forth between directly controlling her or not? I don't know, man. This is my first video about this franchise, and I'm already tired. So long story short here, Tobi attacks Alex, and then Katie turns into a succubus and charges her, but when she tries to escape out the window, she finds Wyatt, but she's immediately surrounded by a horde of over 50 midwives, all wearing the thaumaturgic triangle necklaces. Notably, the coven has massively grown its ranks. Where before, the group consisted of a handful of old women, the members now span a much greater age range, suggesting that they've continued recruiting aggressively. The Legion of Women stops Alex in her tracks, rendering her unable to get away from Katie. According to police, Hunter is not seen again after this date. When it comes to the midwives, the hierarchy is not exactly clear. We know Kent is a potential leader, and we know Lois seemed to be high-ranking up until her supposed passing in the 90s or 2000s. After learning that Lois had died, Katie ended up with some of her stuff, but dropped it off in her younger sister's basement shortly before Hunter was born. This included one box of tapes from 1988, but little did they know, Lois had several more boxes of tapes, which ended up in the possession of her friend, Anna Sanchez, a midwife member from Oxnard, California. It seems that Anna may have taken over some of Lois's duties after she disappeared, because in June 2012, we can see her marking a young woman with a thaumaturgic triangle, or the Hadissac symbol of fertility, whatever you want to call it. But this action proves that Lois was not the only one who had bargained with the beast. There were other women who traded their firstborn in exchange for wealth, power, and the benefits offered by the demon. And this is one of them. Anna seems to be there to facilitate the exchange. But while most of the coven seems focused on finding a human body for Tobi, Anna is preoccupied with a different ritual. She wants to travel to the past and change the course of the midwives' history. My theory is that she wanted to go back to prevent Katie and Hunter from getting separated during the 5-year gap. She also has notebooks full of information about the Featherston family dating back to the 1980s, and multiple pictures of this doorway, sketched alongside Latin and Spanish incantations, which basically amounts to a demonic summoning ritual. In simplest terms, if Kristi was able to channel Tobi's power to see into the future, Anna believed that she could channel that power to visit the past. She would need someone to channel the demon's magic, but this goes south for her when one of her subjects, Oscar Lopez, discovers that he is one of the many firstborn males marked by the demon and kills Anna and later himself to escape the curse. But before news of Anna's death reaches the midwives, her demonic research is discovered by her neighbors, Jesse, Hector, and Marisol. Together, they summon the demon out of curiosity and boredom. There is a figure in the distance that witnesses the ritual in secret. Maybe this is one of the midwives making sure that the cards fall into place as planned. Or maybe just a homeless guy. And if you haven't figured it out by now, they start to experience actividad de paranormal. That means paranormal activity. Hostile chihuahuas, a possessed Simon toy, and the same bite mark found on previous victims are all concerning signs. But this time, there's a difference. The main subject is male, so Jesse receives the benefits of the demon's protection. Muggers are blasted through the air, and Jesse realizes that the demon will catch him if he falls. This protection does not extend to his friend Hector. But his powers grant him the ability to do incredible skateboard stunts without fear of injury, blow up an air mattress in seconds, and pick up girls at a party with ease. But after sneaking into the basement of Anna's apartment,
not many people have basements in California,
and discovering that he is one of the boys marked by the demon since before birth, he realizes that he may be in danger, and notices the downsides of his new invisible bodyguard. He's sleepwalking at night without realizing it, causing lights to flicker in his presence, and he pulls black goop out of his eyes. He becomes weirdly territorial over Marisol, and claims that he felt like he wasn't in control of himself. This could actually validate my earlier idea about Katie, that when she isn't possessed, she can still be controlled by a demon. All of this behavior leads up to a night where Jesse hears his dog barking from downstairs in Anna's abandoned apartment, but when he goes down there, he's ambushed by the Midwives. At one point, he encounters black-eyed versions of the 12 and 9-year-old Katie and Kristi from 1992, perhaps a sign that the door of time is now open. And this is just a theory, but this could be the reason that Katie, Kristi, and Hunter are able to disappear for years at a time, evade the police, then turn up out of the blue. They're not going into hiding, they're going to another time period and coming back. Jesse is knocked out by an unseen force and wakes back up in his bed with the word Mayos written on his wall. The same text that appeared in the Rey household after Hunter's mysterious basement experience back in 2006. The difference is that Jesse is 18, so if Ali Ray's theory is correct, he's ripe to be possessed by Tobi. No amount of spiritual cleansing is able to undo this, and the possessed Jesse seems to bend reality inward before popping out, sending a shockwave of destruction. You have to wonder if this is what happened to the Rey's house in summer of 2006. Crosses fall off the walls, and Jesse even pushes his grandmother down the stairs under the demon's possession. That night, the Midwives T-bone Hector's car and abduct Jesse, and he's taken to Lois's old house in Moore Park, California, where one final spell would be performed. Aided with armed reinforcements, Jesse's friends arrive at 1331 Foothill Road, the base of operations for the Midwives and the former home of Lois, attempting to break in the same door that Dennis tried to escape out of 32 years before. This time around, the garage is empty, but some kind of barn out back houses an imprisoned woman, and the friends are attacked by screeching witches from every direction. They take cover inside the house, which is now empty, save for some covered furniture, bringing back reminders of the inside of Robbie and Katie's house in Nevada the previous year. There's also this candlelit pentagram ritual in the middle of the living room with a severed animal head in the center. Witches surround the entire house and ultimately get to Mercer, dropping her through the skylight to her death. Hector is chased upstairs by the possessed Jesse, made even scarier by his apparent ability to warp around the house and the inhuman roar he lets out as he hunts after his friend. He locks himself in the upstairs bedroom, but soon comes to find that this is where the doorway to the past is located. With the demon-crazed Jesse already breaking down the entryway, his only choice is to step into the mysterious door. The camera glitches out and he ends up in a garage, but this is not Lois's garage, it's Katie and Micah's. Hector has traveled back to October 9th, 2006, and he goes inside just in time to see the possessed Katie march downstairs and stab Micah to death. Hector tries to get away, but he's met with Demon Jesse, now coming in from the garage, and he's one-shotted, presumably killing Hector in the past. An older woman appears and clicks off the camera. There's some debate as to who this is, but I'm pretty sure it's just a random coven practitioner. So now there's technically an alternate timeline where Hector's body is found alongside Micah's at the end of Paranormal Activity 1. But like I said earlier, this is never really touched upon, so it doesn't make a huge difference. The final chapter of the Midwives saga is Paranormal Activity: The Ghost Dimension. If you'll recall, the Fleege family, Ryan, Emily, and their 8-year-old daughter, Leila, moved into the house sold to them by Katie. On November 29th, 2013, Ryan's brother, Mike, is visiting and discovers an old camera outfitted with a dimensional selection ring, which, when tuned properly, allows you to see into the ghost dimension. I feel like a jackass using the words ghost dimension, but that's probably the easiest way to describe it. Using the camera, Ryan notices weird glitches and artifacts. He hears Leila talking to someone while alone in her room, and notices these strange particles next to her as she claims she's talking to her friend. Again, Tobi has utilized the fact that only kids and pets can see him to make it look like he's just an imaginary friend in the eyes of the parents. I know this may come as a complete shock, a true twist that nobody saw coming, but the family starts to experience paranormal activity, including crickets in the backyard all going quiet, a dark energy that whips past the camera, and the seesaw moving on its own. At one point, Leila wanders outside in the middle of the night, much like what Katie did in the original, and draws pretty much the same response.
Leila, honey, what are you doing out here, sweetie? It's cold.
And a spectral figure on the camera darts out of the way. In addition to some of the usual symptoms of paranormal activity, like the swinging chandelier, seriously, why does Tobi love swinging the chandelier so much? Leila starts to exhibit signs that she's being influenced by a demon. She refuses to talk about Tobi when asked about him, much like Kristi in 1988, and she's found in the bathroom chanting Bloody Mary backwards, the same game that Katie and Kristi played all of those years ago. And just like that original game, something happens once she's left the room. Her parents soon discover that she's been getting up at night and interacting with the dark energy seen on the camera, And she somehow finds out about the nuchal cord complication that she experienced while still in utero, something that would be impossible for her to know about. But given what we learned from Jesse and Hector's findings, it's likely that the demon could have marked her even before birth. In addition to that, if we go back to Kristi's training in 1992, she was told that she would help the coven find special people. It's hard to say exactly when Leila gets possessed because there's no clear-cut moment of her getting dragged into a basement, but I would say that it happens right here, and her possession is a lot like how Katie was under the demon's spell, but full control can be taken at any time. I say that because things get much worse later that week, and Leila really starts acting not like herself. She bites another kid at school, and under Tobi's instruction, attempts to destroy and get rid of any religious objects in the house. She tries to bury her mom's cross in the backyard and throws Bible pages into the fireplace and attempts to light it. When she's sent back to bed, the dark energy inhabiting the house tries to light the fireplace again with Emily still in it, and throws the angel from the top of their Christmas tree. Leila would later claim that all of this behavior was part of a game she was playing with Tobi.
He told me to burn things.
As a result, her mom orders her to stop talking to Tobi altogether, and she reluctantly agrees. As the black particles in the camera get more pronounced, it becomes clear that something horrible has attached itself to the Fleege's daughter. Mike and Ryan see something resembling a face on the camera. I don't think this is what Leila, Kristi, Hunter, Robbie, or any of the other kids see when they speak to Tobi. Because for one, what kid would be friends with this? And two, Emily's spiritual healing obsessed friend Skylar offers an explanation as to what the floating particles seen on the camera really represent.
Most of the time, these cameras, they don't pick up on beings as much as, different planes of existence, somewhere where a lot of displaced energy would travel to. So if Tobi is moving around on another plane of existence, he leaves behind traces and maybe even a general shape, but the dimension that the camera sees still isn't the one where Tobi is. The family also starts to see evidence that Kristi in the past is able to see forward in time, and she's watching Leila in the present. On December 16th, Tobi continues to try to convince Leila to create this portal to a better dimension.
And I can go there? All I have to do is draw it?
It's not long after that, she begins drawing a border of occult figures on her wall, much like what we saw on Kristi's easel in 1988 and on the border of the time door that Hector crossed through in 2012. The markings consist of various occult symbols. I don't feel the need to explain all of them because, again, I think they exist more as a connection to the markings seen in the Featherston girl's room. However, there's no footage of these symbols turning into a time door like the one Tobi is having Leila create. But even though we don't see it, I am convinced that Tobi had Kristi create the same door. Because remember, it was only for a moment, but Katie and Kristi do appear as kids in the area below Anna's apartment 1 year before this. All of this is to say that future and past were about to meet once more. Leila's dad is able to make the connection between the symbols found on her wall in the Midwives, but he's not in time to stop her from beginning what I can only assume is some kind of spell by blowing into this recorder. When they take the flute from her, they're distracted by more otherworldly interference. The classic swinging chandelier, a Santa toy brought to life, and Tobi wearing a Santa suit. I don't know if I get that one. I guess it's another example of religious mockery. Saint Nick is associated with a Christian holiday, just like Asmodeus is adopted from the name Tobi from a religious text. Before anyone has time to call Santa's workshop, a black wraith rushes in through the open window, causing them to grab Leila and flee. The following day, she's again hesitant to talk, but admits that Tobi is planning to take her away to be with the others. They also bring in a priest who discovers the name Hunter written on her chalkboard. According to Micah's research in the original Paranormal Activity, bringing in a priest or exorcist can often just anger the presence in the house and make things worse. I did look into that claim online to see if there's any reasoning behind that belief, and the main consensus seems to be that it can make things worse, because it's just feeding into the beliefs of the person who believes that they're being haunted and potentially delaying mental health treatment, which is pretty funny. But in the case of Father Todd, who assists the Fleesh family, he angers the demon by crossing some holy water onto Leila's head, which hurts the entity and draws another callous reaction. As Micah had feared, things get worse again after that. The floating entity causes a huge commotion, completely dislocating the huge kitchen island and opening all of the cabinets. It's almost as if Tobi is pulling out all the tricks we've seen over the years because he knows that he's close to finally achieving his long-term goal. Ryan can be seen researching Christian theology about the sacrificial lamb, which I'll come back to in a little bit. Strangely, the possessed Leila seems to spend a lot of time staring into the fireplace. Perhaps the smell of the fireplace would be a comfort to the demon, who is used to the fiery ashes of hell. Let's just say it doesn't go smoothly when Skylar tries to talk to her.
Get away from me.
Whoa, same. It's also possible that she was just biding time, because December 19th would be a very special day for Asmodeus, as this would be the day his last 7 years of planning would come to fruition. It started at 2:15 a.m. when the portal behind Leila's bed would burst open, and the voice of a child, presumably Kristi, beckons her to come play. She disappears for a while, and when she comes back to reality, she makes an ominous claim.
I'm gonna set him free, Daddy.
Though it's not clear who she's going to set free. Maybe Tobi has promised her that the other kids that he captured will be let go if she cooperates. But then again, he clearly already has possession of her, so maybe this line was actually just to throw off her parents. The family decides that enough is enough, so they decide to stay in a hotel for the time being. But when Uncle Mike and Skylar come back to grab a few things from the house, even though these are all things that they easily could have gotten at any store, they notice a drawing in Leila's room, which is the same sacrificial lamb that we saw Ryan researching before from Revelation chapter 5 in the Christian Bible. This is yet another sinister twist on religion. In Christianity, Jesus is referred to as the Lamb of God, and they believe that he was sacrificed to atone for humanity's sins. So, in Asmodeus' demonic lore, the lamb represents a different sacrifice.
The slain lamb will be used against God, for the blood of the chosen ones will taint it and help give life to one of the 7 princes of hell. Each prince shall return through the blood of the 2 born of the same moon.
They conclude that Leila and Hunter are the 2 who will be sacrificed to resurrect the demon, because they were both born on the same day, which would explain why Hunter's name appeared in Leila's room. But more importantly to this video, this inscription might be the best evidence we have that Asmodeus and Tobi really are the same, because it's the first time that Tobi is referred to as one of the 7 princes of hell, which is exactly how Asmodeus is described in Next of Kin. There's a small chance that they are both different princes of hell, but the evidence is really starting to stack up in favor of them being the same entity. Hopefully you can see how I became convinced over the course of making this video. When Leila somehow appears back at the house, clawing at the wall and spewing ancient phrases, they decide to take emergency action, and Father Todd soaks some blankets in holy water, hoping to catch the demon with them. He does not expressly refer to them as holy sheets, but you can bet your bottom dollar I will be. When the time comes, the entire family stands inside the seal known as the Key of Solomon, but Leila's eyes go black, and she informs them that the entity is already privy to their plan. It goes about as well as you could expect. The power goes out, furniture and people are tossed through the room, and the camera briefly catches what is maybe the clearest shot of a skull-faced humanoid entity leaping into the circle, where they're able to cover it with the holy sheets and seemingly banish it with the recitation of ancient text. But the perceived victory is extremely short-lived, as they find out when Skylar vomits a black corrosive liquid onto Mike, creating enough of a distraction for Leila to run back to her room and enter the portal once more. The black barf trope is something that has become kind of a staple in horror. We've seen it in The Babadook, Evil Dead, Jennifer's Body, and like every Conjuring franchise movie besides The Nun. It's almost become one of those conventions that are just so common that audiences just understand it automatically. Like how if we fade to a shot with washed out colors, the audience understands that it's a flashback. Or if we see a location tinted like this, we know that it's Mexico for some reason. So the black barf tells us that Skylar was taken over by the demon's influence. There's also a giant hand that bursts out of Ryan's body, so that's kind of a new ability. But in the end, Emily's only chance at getting her daughter back is to follow her into the time door, which causes the camera to glitch out just like when Hector entered in the previous year. It spits her out in Katie and Kristi's room, meaning that she's gone back in time to this same plot of land, but before the original house was burned down, likely somewhere between 1988 and 1992, because all of the furniture is covered just like it was for previous Midwives meeting places. But her journey through this surreal and lurid place only leads her to a chilling discovery. The black-eyed Katie and Kristi inform her that she's too late, and Tobi has already taken a human form. But she does manage to find Leila, who informs her that they only needed 1 drop of her blood. So the good news is that Leila is alive, but the bad news is that Tobi, in his new human body, has discovered her intrusion. He lifts her, breaks her neck, and walks away hand in hand with Leila, presumably the newest member of his witch coven of supporters. Someone grabs the camera at the end, and how this footage was released for viewing remains a mystery. At this point, it would seem that the paranormal entity Asmodeus had achieved all of his goals. He had spread fear and terror to the human world, kidnapped and brainwashed an army of boys, expanded and manipulated a coven of backers, and fully moved into a human body with the ability to walk the earth. With a human body, a demon can exert a lot more influence, power, and control over the real world, and can achieve a lot more than knocking over furniture and swinging chandeliers, and whatever this is. However, existing in the real world also makes it harder to disappear and hide from your enemies, and Asmodeus' opposers weren't out of the picture yet. Before I move on, let's revisit the timeline. Tobi first recruited Katie and Kristi in 1988, possessed Katie and kidnapped Hunter in 2006, and recaptured Hunter in 2011. In 2012, Hector and Jesse traveled back to 2006, creating a new reality where Hector is found dead alongside his camera inside of Katie and Micah's house. We don't know if the story continues from that time or the original, but let's pretend that it continues from the altered timeline. 4 and 5 would probably play out more or less the same, but in 2013, Leila and Emily travel back to 1988, where Tobi gets a body. And since he already has a body and an army now, there's probably no need for 2, 1, 4, or 5, or Tokyo Night. We don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that this is where the rest of the story takes place. It would explain the absence of Katie and Hunter, and it would explain why Asmodeus seems to be confined to one place when he never was before. He can only haunt the area near the human body that he's trapped inside. In this timeline, I'm guessing things go a bit different, and the Beiler family manages to capture Asmodeus and plans to transfer his spirit into a woman from their chosen bloodline. In 1997, Sarah realizes this is going to be her baby, so on October 10th, 1997, after giving birth to a girl, she runs away from the community and leaves Margot at a hospital. But eventually, the Amish community finds Sarah and traps Asmodeus inside of her. She stays there in her underground prison, holding back the demon for decades. But in 2020, her seal is starting to slip, and the evil slips out into the real world. Livestock is born with severe mutations, including a two-headed goat to represent Asmodeus's two heads. Elders lose focus and begin hurting themselves. Phantom footsteps can be heard all around the farm, and some even see spectral faces. But luckily for the Beiler family, they managed to locate Margot using the DNA matching service 23andMe. They send one of their members, Samuel, to meet with her on March 2nd, 2021, taking advantage of the fact that she's never met one of her relatives before, so naturally she's interested in coming back to the farm to meet more of them. At first, they're surprised by her bringing along a documentary film crew, but ultimately decide that it shouldn't be an issue. The community makes nightly sacrifices to try to keep Asmodeus at bay as long as possible, doing their best to hide their secret from their guests. But Margot and her crew easily notice that this place is ripe with paranormal activity. At dinner, the youngest members come out and perform a song in German, which roughly translates to "Jesus we are coming, Jesus we are coming, Christ spares the whole earth." This shows that they are on the holy side of the battle between God and Satan. They believe that their religious sacrifices will keep the demon at bay because they believe that Jesus' sacrifice saved humanity from sin in the past. On March 11th, Margot interviews a little girl who tells her that her mom is still here and doesn't like her, prompting Margot to do more searching and eventually find the church in the woods, locked with a bar that translates to "no further than that." A day later, they manage to distract Samuel and sneak into the church, where they see paintings of Asmodeus with captions like, "We must stay vigilant, for the evil spread amongst us, the young and weak will suffer first, lest sacrifices be made." They uncover the chasm, and Margot sees bags of salt and animal bones at the bottom. When she hears growling, she asks to be pulled back up. On March 14th, the family most likely puts something in the film crew's food so that they don't wake up while they do what they're planning to do to Margot. She's woken up in the middle of the night and sees the door open on its own, and notices a line of people watching from outside shortly before she's aerated to the ceiling. The next morning, she seems entranced. It's not clear if this has something to do with Asmodeus, or if the sect of villagers themselves have worked some kind of magic on her, as an excuse to keep her from leaving the farm. I will note that it's barely seen, but in the hall they have a framed picture of what I can only describe as a knit and cloth version of a Ouija board, which could suggest that they have some demonic or spiritual forces on their side as well. Chris, the cameraman, figures out what they're up to, but when he goes to save Margot, he's held at gunpoint and told if Asmodeus is set free, he'll jump from body to body and kill every last person. That doesn't stop Chris from taking the guy out and descending into the chasm to save his friend, who he finds at the bottom of the pit in the midst of a ritual performed by some lady. The woman has tattoos of the triple moon and several pentagrams, which are also patterned on her cape, which were both symbols used by the Midwives in connection with Asmodeus. But I don't think that this means that this woman is connected to the Midwives. It's something to show that both opposing groups have to draw from similar protocols in order to interact with the demon. But a difference between the Midwives rituals and this Beiler family ritual is that this one is surrounded by a barrier of salt intended to keep Asmodeus from getting in and interfering. And when Chris accidentally breaks the barrier, she freaks out and immediately tries to repair it. The compromise of the barrier allows Margot's mother, Sarah, cracked, withered, and worn down from decades of carrying the demon inside of her and holding back the evil's power with no sunlight, to rise from her self-appointed underworld throne and attack the first thing she sees, which happens to be the Beiler family woman. The creature scales the walls of the chasm and hits open air for the first time. The sound guy is the next victim. A moment of silence for the sound guy. That was a room tone he would have been proud of. Margot and Chris are chased into the barn, whose animal inhabitants seem very much aware of the impending doom, much like the Rey family's dog Abby sounded the alarm back in the original timeline. When Sarah catches up with the two filmmakers, she attacks Chris relentlessly, but pauses when she hears the voice of her daughter.
Stop! Get off of him! Sarah!
My interpretation is that although her hold on Asmodeus is slipping, Sarah still has agency. She thought she was getting revenge on the community who imprisoned her, but she hadn't expected her daughter would be among them. Margot buys herself just enough time to attack what's left of her mother with a hook and kick her down into a hole where she's skewered by a piece of sharp farming machinery. But Margot, acting in self-interest, doesn't realize the horror that she's just unleashed. Asmodeus is no longer confined to a human body, and the prophecy warned about in the church's paintings comes true. The church bell rings repeatedly, getting faster and faster as the demon jumps from victim to victim, setting the entire village ablaze, gouging out eyes, lodging an axe into someone's chest, and attacking anyone in sight. The demon ultimately decides to stay in the body of Samuel. Police arrive at the farm and hear the sound of a crying baby, but it turns out to just be a noise created by Samuel. This represents a rebirth, a new start for Asmodeus inside of an adult body. He stares the cop in the eyes, and somehow this possesses him to shoot himself in the head. After doing the same to a second cop, he gets into the police car and drives away, finally escaping the restrictive confines of the Beiler farm. Presumably, Margot, the only one left from the chosen bloodline, would be his next target. The Beilers were not the evil that she perceived them to be. Their goal was just to prevent the evil from getting out. They just used some pretty unethical methods. And that is where we are left regarding the story of Asmodeus. The overarching story of the demon is told indirectly with little bits of information scattered across the Paranormal Activity films. So hopefully this video helps someone understand what is actually going on here. Because even watching the films back to back, the connections between each of these recordings are not exactly clear. Especially if you're not familiar with any of the quote-unquote real demonology that it's all based on. And on top of that, I had to make a lot of assumptions and educated guesses to solve the mystery story that exists somewhere in the shadows of this franchise. Not to complain, but this was actually one of the toughest videos to make. And even with all of that, there's still some loose ends. For example, Lois, the leader of the Midwives. We're told that she died prior to Paranormal Activity 2, and she does stop appearing, seemingly being replaced by Anna, but there are plenty of characters who disappear for a while in this franchise. My theory was that this happens because the characters just go to another time period for a while using the time door. So yeah, I'm not 100% convinced that Lois is out of the picture just yet. Then there's Hunter. To tell you the truth, if my suspicion that Next of Kin takes place in a third timeline is correct, then I'm not even sure that Hunter would have been born in this reality. And if he was, he might just not be relevant. But if Hunter was born, he would have turned 18 in 2023, 2 years after the events at the Beiler farm. As we know from the marked ones, 18 is the age where a demon comes to possess a child who is marked. So it's possible that at some point, Margot and Hunter could cross paths, the last stand for good against evil. If you like this deep dive, check out that playlist on the left, which contains my analysis of other demons from the Lesser Key of Solomon, such as Valak, Payman, and Malthus. I'm gonna keep you up to date with any new developments with this timeline, so make sure you subscribe and ring the death bell to stay in the loop. I will see you in the next one, assuming we both survive.